I'd love to introduce Karen O'Sullivan has joined us this morning. How are you today?
I am not too bad.
Um, where are you coming? Where are you joining us from, and kind of what's your background?
Well, in terms of my current location, I'm based in Harold's Cross, for those of you who are based in Dublin. So in terms of work, I'm currently working as a managing director in Accenture as part of our operations business. So what that means is that I'm responsible end to end, essentially, for client relationships and delivery of services. So things like outsourcing services, technology, and so on. That's pretty much my role at the moment. It's pretty challenging. I don't mind telling you. It's definitely not a 9 to 5, but I'm somebody who thrives on challenge. So really enjoying it at the moment.
Great. Well, really appreciate you taking time out of your busy Friday to come and join us.
Oh, of course, no worries. And I have to say, I do love working with Jobcare and working with all of your different programs. One thing I would ask folks is genuinely, if you have a question, feel free to answer or to ask it. I promise you, I'll pretty much answer anything as honestly as I can, except maybe what's my weight or my age. Although honestly, I'll probably answer those too. But if you've any questions at all during the session, please put them into the box or raise your hand, and so we can have the best discussion that we can, and you're getting as much as you can out of the chat.
Great. In terms of what we're going to do this morning, I'm going to hand over to Karen in a sec, and she's got a presentation to kind of take us through. But we'll both be super attentive to any questions that come up. So feel free to ask away. And if I need to kind of jump in and ask Karen, I will do that. Great. We're going to go through till about 12 o'clock, and depending on how many questions there are, but we'll see. Great. Over to you for now, and I'll come back to some questions in a sec.
Super stuff. So what I'm going to do, Rowley, just really quickly is share my screen. So if you
Great.
can just let me know if you can see it,
Well, I can
that
see
would
it.
be
Yeah, I
great.
think it needs to be full screen there as well. Yeah.
There we go.
Start the presentation. That looks fine to me. Yeah. Great.
Super stuff. So what I came to talk to the group today is about how to be a strategic job hunter, and also I put a little byline in there to say and protect your sanity too. Having had to look for jobs previously myself, and also been a hiring manager on a vast number of occasions, it's really important to me to not just think about your strategy in and of itself in terms of how do you approach employers and stuff, but also think about how do you manage yourself in that context, manage your energy levels and your motivation and all that. Because if you've been looking for a job for a number of months, it can really start to wear after a while. And so, from that perspective, I just want to make sure that we're covering both of those angles, and making sure that you guys are really set up for success in terms of going to the market, engaging with companies that you want to work for, and getting what you need out of those interactions, whether it's the right kind of connections or whether it's a job, whatever it is, that you're really just set up for success there. So I think starting from zero, one of the things that I want to talk about is the world has really changed a lot, even in just the last 5 years, but especially over the last, say, 10 to 15 years, in terms of how people and companies identify candidates and go through their recruitment process. So I know many of you are probably somewhat of a similar vintage to myself. And so my mum would often say to me, back in 2000, don't get into cars with strangers and don't meet people from the internet. Both of these things are inherently dangerous activities. And 20 years later, we literally summon strangers from the internet to get into their car. So at a very basic level, the world has really changed, and recruitment has very much changed along with it. So previously, back in the 80s and 90s, it would have been very much around want ads in the newspaper, what contacts you had in the business and all that sort of good stuff, and praying that day to day, the newspaper that you buy would have different job ads in it, and different things to be able to apply to, or that you had the right connections within the industry, or you knew people who had the right connections. Um, Job boards really, really transformed all of that. So I'm sure a lot of you remember Monster Jobs. They're still around. They're still very successful. IrishJobs.ie is another one for those of you who remember when the Irish Times first kicked that off. And job boards really started to democratize the jobs workplace and the jobs environment, because it meant that your contacts weren't so important anymore to a certain extent, because you could see all of the jobs that were available and out there, and they were at your fingertips in a very sort of a real time environment. And so you're able to go in, find jobs that previously you maybe wouldn't have been aware of, and apply to those jobs and show yourself as a potential candidate. Where that has really, really changed now is the rise of social. People are able to find jobs pretty much anywhere, right? Obviously, LinkedIn is a major source, but you'll even see, jobs being advertised on Facebook, on Twitter. There's a lot more of a real time, hi, I need a help, I need somebody to do this job. Would you be willing to do it? I've even seen jobs posted on Instagram a couple of times recently, which is really, really interesting, but also means that we again have a very democratized kind of jobs environment and jobs market, which means, there's an awful lot of different facets to cover, and there's an awful lot of different entry points that you can be looking at. And so when I think about how that relates to kind of your situation and figuring out how do you figure out, what is the right point of entry for you or the right points of entry for you, choosing those and having the right sort of strategy and engagement plan has really become more and more critical so that you're getting the most return on investment for the time that you're spending on applications, on engaging with employers, whatever that is. Um, Putting together your jobs market access strategy can often feel a little bit overwhelming and a little bit disparate, right? If it's something that you're not used to, or if you're recently back to the jobs market, or maybe it's your first time coming into a job, there's a lot of different things that you think you need to do. And reading job specs from a number of companies can also feel like you need to be this kind of perfect person or perfect candidate. And the reality is often very different. But I've just put some examples here. Of the 5 examples, I can tell you that I have achieved only one of them, which is wearing a fake mustache for 24 hours last year when my team was doing Movember. So I committed to helping them do that by wearing a fake mustache. Probably not my best look aesthetically, I'll be honest with you, but we did raise a fair amount of money, so it was worth the sacrifice, I'll be honest. So thinking about then your jobs market access strategy, typically speaking, what I like to do is break it down into 2 elements, and those fall into promote yourself, which is basically how do I differentiate myself from other potential candidates, and then protect myself. How do I manage my approach during the job hunt and during the interview process so that I'm getting the maximum return on investment for my time, but I'm also managing my headspace during that time and not feeling like my priorities are being compromised, my motivation is taking a dip, any of that sort of good stuff. So I'm going to jump into promote yourself first. Within promote yourself, I think one thing it's very useful to do is to understand what sort of questions are companies asking themselves now as part of the recruitment process, right? When I was working in LinkedIn before Accenture, I was their head of customer success for global accounts. And so I would regularly talk to CHROs and other senior members of their recruitment team to understand what was top of mind for them at that particular point in time. And we know that these continue to be questions that companies, even now as I work in Accenture, are still asking themselves. So how do I approach diversity within my organizations? Do I have the right level of diversity? Where are we winning and losing talent? There really is a war on talent at the moment, and the answer to that is talent one. What you'll find is that companies are often fighting amongst themselves for the same talent pool set, which puts candidates in a very, very unique position from the point of view of, who should they apply to and what should they be thinking about during their negotiation process. There's a lot of very niche roles out there and niche skill sets at the moment. And so for hard to fill roles, what companies are asking themselves is like, where does the target talent live? What's important to them? What do they care about? How can I get my hands on them and get them to stay in my organization? There's some other basics there around attrition. So what we'll see, and I'll show you a slide on it later, is how candidates are thinking about the companies that they apply to or thinking about their current employers is very much changing. And some of it has been driven by COVID, the changes that have occurred in the workplace and so on. But some of it is also being driven by what people are seeing happen in different countries and various different political movements, which is driving really how they're thinking about their career, their employer, and so on. I read a very interesting statistic recently that I think 76 out of the top 1,000 companies on the New York Stock Exchange, 76 CEOs have actually left their role because they want to take a step back and understand what's important to them. They spent a long time in these types of senior roles and they want to take a step back to say, is this still important to me, or do I want to pursue another career avenue now because the things that were important to me aren't anymore? Then there's a lot of talk around skill sets. What skill sets am I hiring for versus should I be hiring for? I think we can all see that the jobs market is evolving, and the skills that people need in order to be able to do jobs are very much evolving. And so companies are asking themselves, yes, I have this skill set now. Is this going to sustain what it is that I'm trying to do? Is this going to sustain my innovation plans? If it's not, what skill sets do I need to be looking at? Where do they live and how do I attract them? And how competitive, again, is the market for that set of skills? Like, what am I going to have to pay, or what am I going to have to do in order to bring this skill set into my business? So all of these questions are things that organizations are regularly asking themselves, and then trying to figure out, based on the answer, what should their go-to-market strategy be to engage people like you and say, I want you to come and work for my business, and this is what I want to show you is attractive about working with my company, or is attractive about the career path within my company, or whatever that is. So obviously, how do companies answer these questions, right? And a big part of the answer to this is social media, and understanding how their target audiences are interacting on social media. And there's three main elements to this interaction profile that they'll look at. First of all, is probably an obvious one that you've thought of already, is your profile. So whatever social media platform that you're on, looking at, what does your profile say about you? Who are you as a person? And when it comes to things like LinkedIn, for example, or Indeed, what skills are within your profile, what experience is sitting in your profile that you're telling other businesses, and that acts as a signal in terms of what kind of candidate are you. The next piece then is looking at engagement. And engagement is exactly what you think it is. It's, how are you interacting with posts? What are you posting? Have you interacted with their brand before? What do those actions say about you as a candidate in terms of, will you be a good cultural fit for them? What's important to you? Will they be able to match that in terms of whatever their offer, their strategy is? All that sort of good stuff sits within engagement. And how you then interact with the platform tells those employers what is important to you, and all that sort of good stuff. And the last piece is around intent. And intent is, what do you want to be known for? And this is somewhat part of profile and engagement, but intent kind of speaks more to your broader career ambitions. So have you interacted with a company? So say, for example, I want to work with Google, I go onto their website. Or I want to work with Google and I go into LinkedIn and I look at their company page, for example. What intent are you demonstrating there? Are there particular jobs that you regularly look at, or are there particular searches that you're regularly putting in for particular job titles? All of these things demonstrate that type of intent to tell a company that, A, you're an attractive candidate to them from a skills perspective, but B, you're also disposed to working with them because you like their brand, or you like what they do, or you're interacting with their content in some way, which gives them an indication that you're interested in their particular business. So I'm going to pause there before I go any deeper. I can see that there's 3 comments in the chat, Rowley. Is there anything in there that we need to be chatting about?
I've taken care of those. It was a question from where's the chat? It was just a question from Breda asking if we can get the deck. But you sent that to me this morning, so I'll make sure that it gets sent on to all the participants here as well. So thanks.
I did have some tech issues, but I did manage to send my deck out ahead of time, which is a bit of a miracle. So yes, absolutely, you will get the slides. And if anybody has any kind of follow-up questions or wants to engage with me separately to have a deeper chat, please feel free to do that. I'm always very open to connecting on LinkedIn, or if you want to email me directly, Rowley has my email address and all that sort of good stuff. So please, as I say, I know this isn't the most interactive forum in some ways, or maybe you're not feeling comfortable to have a chat about it in this forum. If you do want to ask me anything separately, please just get in touch.
And just a polite note, if you're connecting with Karen or anyone on LinkedIn, it's always great to put a little note to say, hey, I was on your workshop earlier, when you make that connection request.
Yep, absolutely. Please send me a note. Otherwise, I'm just going to think you're a random person trying to connect with me, and I get a lot of those. So yeah, if you could just put some sort of a note in there, that would be great. I can see Deepa
actually,
asked if companies
question,
can see what searches that we do on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn is very much a members first company. And so from that perspective, companies cannot see your searches. But what they can see is where you have interacted with their brand. So hypothetically speaking, if you go onto like Google's page, they can see that you've interacted with their brand in some way. They can't see specifically what you've done, right? But they can see that you have maybe interacted with some content, or that you have looked at their company page, or that type of thing. So they won't see at a very granular level, but they will see, have you interacted with their brand in some way at a very high level.
Great. Hey, that's great. I'm glad we're through our first question. That's super. So
Love your work,
back.
Deepa. Well done.
Great. Yeah. So back to you then.
So, so one of the things that I think a lot of candidates don't think about is actually what impacts them prior to the application stage, right? So typically as a candidate, what you're thinking about is the second half of this pyramid. You know, I've applied, I'm going through the screening process, interviewing, et cetera, et cetera. But the way that companies actually look at the application process or the recruitment process involves some additional steps that maybe you wouldn't be aware of or you wouldn't be conscious of, but you're actually engaging with without necessarily thinking about it. And so what they look at here is around aware, engaged, and considered, right? What aware means is that a potential candidate may be targeted and exposed to the company brand. So you'll know if you've any exposure to like Google ads or if you've any exposure to any type of ad product that sits within a social media platform. What'll typically happen is that the company will give Google or LinkedIn or Facebook a profile of what they want the target audience to look like. Now, within LinkedIn, obviously, and Indeed actually as well, you can target specific candidates by saying, you know, I need Irish or people who are based in Ireland who have accountancy skill sets, for example, and who are roughly around this level of experience. And so, you know, platforms like LinkedIn and Indeed will facilitate that. Within, when you go into things like Facebook and, you know, Google platforms, it's a little bit more broad because obviously within your Google or your Facebook profile, you don't necessarily have your skill set and so on, but they can target, you know, these types of individuals who potentially work for these companies and who've displayed these types of characteristics, right? And so they will target very specific people to see, you know, if you're exposed to the company's brand, do you then engage with the brand, which is the next step down? And that's where you take some sort of an action to learn more about that company as an employer. So you might go onto their homepage, for example, you might go into their LinkedIn page, their LinkedIn company page or their Indeed company page, and try to learn a little bit about them, whether it's just going into the page and scrolling or whether it's interacting with comment. Have you taken some sort of a step to engage with their brand? And then the next level down is considering. And considering is probably more related to specific job boards or job related social media platforms like Indeed and LinkedIn, which is where have you taken some sort of an action to signal interest in a specific job? So that could be clicking into the job and reviewing it. It could be clicking the apply button within that job. But at some point, you have taken an action to say, I want to look at this specific job and I'm potentially interested in applying for that job. And what you've probably guessed is that as you go down that pyramid, the number of people that are passing through each phase gets lower and lower and lower. And so from a company's perspective, they are very interested in maximizing this particular portion of the pyramid, so the aware, engaged, and considered, so that they're maximizing the number of candidates that are going to apply. And then as they go through the funnel and that gets lower, they're getting to the right candidate. For a lot of jobs these days, it's not about getting a bum in a seat, although there was definitely an element of that, I think, you know, historically. These days, companies are very much more focused on having the right person for the job. And it's not just the person with the right skill set, but also who's going to be a good cultural fit, who's going to bring something to the table that they don't have already from maybe a soft skills or a personality perspective, and who's going to be really able to drive the outcomes that they need from that particular role. So, and apologies, my laptop seems to have frozen for whatever reason.
No, that makes a lot of sense, and I think it's really helpful for people to think about where they are in that process and kind of and how that's funneling down. Because like even if you've gone from applied to screened to interviewed, like there was a point made from one of our panelists is that it should be building our confidence to go, actually I've been chosen to go from CV, like they've seen something in my CV or my application that they liked, they saw something in the first round interview, you know, so you're able to like leverage that and actually, you know, kind of stand on that and go, actually I'm here because they want me rather than just because I want to be here.
Absolutely. And as a hiring manager, one of the things that I always do, so typically given my level within Accenture, my level within LinkedIn at the time, and when I was acting as a hiring manager, I was typically the last person who saw you.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of the time when I was setting up interviews and I was having the initial conversation with candidates, I would be very clear to say to them, listen, you're in front of me because you have met all of the requirements so far in terms of your skill set, in terms of, all the different facets, and you've probably gone through 2 to 3 interviews to get to me. And so from that perspective, I don't need to hear about your skill set. You don't need to recite your CV. I am very much more interested in understanding how you, as a potential candidate, could solve the problem that I have in my business at the moment. Because if I have a gap, and I'll go into this a little bit deeper later, but if I have a hiring requirement, it means there's a gap in my organization. And if there's a gap in my organization, that means that fundamentally I have a problem. Either my team is covering that gap, which means that they're tight for capacity and we're less agile, or it means that something isn't getting done. And if something isn't getting done, I have a very specific timeline that I have available to me to get that role backfilled in order for us to be able to avoid any kind of further issues there. So if you think about yourself in that context as you're going through this interview process, the further you go through the process, the less you need to kind of recite tasks and the more you need to focus on how are you the solution to the problem? How are you going to make the hiring manager's life easier? Or what are you going to bring to the table, excuse me, to drive innovation or to drive, increased performance, or whatever it is. But I would very much encourage you to start thinking yourself in that way, because it will shape then how you approach answering questions. It'll shape how you think about approaching, discussions with the hiring manager and all that sort of good stuff, which helps that hiring manager to visualize you in the role. And that's really what you want them to do, right? You really want them to visualize you being the person in that role. Your CV will get you to a point. But after that, it's very much about how you present and the confidence that you can inspire with that hiring manager. We always talk a lot in talent acquisition about taking intelligent risks, because anytime you hire somebody, it's a risk. There's a risk that that person won't like the job. There's a risk that they may not feel, that it's the job for them, et cetera, et cetera. And, so you've gone through all this effort for a candidate who, quite frankly, may decide that they want to leave, and that does happen, unfortunately. Whereas if you take the right intelligent risk and you go through all of the right setup with that candidate to talk them through the culture, talk them through the role and the expectations, and understand how they're going to be the right fit, and solve the problem that you have, 9 times out of 10, you have a candidate who's going to stay with you, stay with the role, and progress their career within your organization.
Mhm.
So, as I say, it's about making sure that you're an intelligent risk and helping that hiring manager to come to the conclusion that you're the right intelligent risk to take.
Yeah, it reminds me of the last role I had before I was working at Jobcare. I was working for a video games company called Riot Games. They're on the Keys, not far from your offices actually, or not far from the dock anyway. Um, and and actually, I went through. I spoke to 11 people as part of the hiring
Gosh.
process. Now there was 2 on-site days, so there was quite intensive on those days. But even before I got on site, I'd had 3 interviews, and when I was on site, I spoke to 5 people for an hour each, and then 3 people took me out to lunch. Um, but by the time I got to the end of the process, the second last person I spoke to was the general manager for all of the European operations. And then the final person I spoke to was a gentleman based in Singapore, and his title was Defender of Culture.
Oh,
And his role was to be like, I don't work in your organization. I don't work in the European team. I've got no interest in filling the gap. I've just got to make sure that you are a cultural fit, because I make a presentation of the conversation we've had and the recommendation from the Dublin office to the president and the CEO to say why we should hire you or not.
yeah.
And I was like, whoa. So I was not telling him, I was not reciting stuff off my CV at all. Like, we were
Yeah.
discussing our favorite video games, and also I really wanted to know what does it mean to be like a defender of
I
culture?
was going to say, do they
Like,
give
what's
him
that
like a
mean?
sword and a shield? Like, that
I
sounds like an
hope so.
epic
Yeah,
role.
yeah, yeah. It totally is. But it was really interesting that was the. It was just at this point where it was completely outside of anyone's interest of getting somebody to fill the role, that was the conversation that you're having. So often it'd be like, like
Mm.
getting to speaking to somebody at the head of a business unit potentially.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And even if you think about, so you probably know Robbie O'Neill. I don't know if any of the candidates here would have met Robbie, but Robbie was actually one of the first people that I recruited to LinkedIn
Great.
when I was working there.
Hmm.
And I'll never forget the first session that I had with him, because he had dialed in from a meeting room, and honestly, it looked like level 3 in the basement. Like there was really intense lighting, there was stippled concrete in the background, and
Yeah.
God bless Robbie, like he was being very professional, and he's calling himself Robert, which I think only his
Uh,
mother calls him Robert when he's
yeah.
angry, and he was trying to be very, and I was really trying to just get a feel for who he was. because like, as I say, I'd already seen his CV. I knew he was pretty good for the role. A number of my team had spoken to him and they'd all given very positive feedback about him. And so I just really needed to understand who he was as a
Yeah.
person and understand like what was he going to bring to the table. And I will never forget the look on his face, because we were kind of halfway into the, maybe kind of 5 minutes into the session, and he was being so kind of professional veneer,
Hmm.
and I just needed to shake him out of it. So I kind of said to him, I was like, Robbie, I'm going to stop you for a second. I was like, are you calling me from Joseph Fritzl's basement? Like, are you being held prisoner? Do you need help? And he just looked at me, and he did exactly what you did, which
Oh,
was burst out laughing. And the second that he did that, it was kind of an all bets are off. He was himself and I was myself, and we were able to have a really good conversation. And ultimately he got hired out of it,
great. Yeah.
which is a great story. But I have had situations where I haven't been able to shake
Mm.
people out of that very,
Yeah.
kind of professional veneer. And because I haven't been able to get a feel for them and how they're going to be part of my team and how they're going to contribute as part of the whole to, the outcomes that we need to achieve and the success that our customers needed to see, I haven't been able to hire people on that basis, even though they've been able to give me all of the skills that I need. So there's a lot of, needing to have confidence in yourself, and yourself, not just yourself as a professional, but yourself as a representation of you in the work context. So that's why I'd say be very kind of thoughtful about how professional, about how professional you want to be in those. And if it's taking away from your authenticity, or if it's taking away from your authentic self and your voice, because it's so, so important that your voice comes through in these interviews, so that people again can visualize you in the role and can visualize how you'll interact with the team and so on. Whereas if you have this kind of like work Karen, as I would call it, if you're too deep into work Karen, then people aren't getting to see the real Karen. And on that basis, then they may not engage with me in the way that I want them to, or they may not understand who I as a person am and what
Mm-hmm.
motivates me and so on.
Mm-hmm. And ultimately, that's the biggest concern for a hiring manager. Like,
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
I've had gaps in my teams before, and I'd rather continue to have a gap than hire the wrong person.
Oh,
You know,
absolutely.
and
Because the wrong person
if
can be
nobody
so
shows up
disruptive.
in the process, yeah, absolutely. And
Mm.
it's way more about that piece. As you know, for me, it's way more about that piece. And also, like, that connection is so important. But also, are they willing to grow? Are they willing to learn? Are they willing to, like, is there self-awareness? Like, all those pieces are super key to,
Mm.
more so than even the skill set, because I really believe that if you hire the right person, like, you can train them to do anything. Like
Yeah, oh,
someone who's
absolutely.
willing
Skills
to learn
can
and grow.
skills can always be imparted, absolutely. But I think getting the right person. I think the only thing that I would pick up on there is, one thing, and I'm kind of thinking back to myself and my sister, right? So I have one sister, she's younger than me, and we have that typical older sister, younger sister relationship even now. But we are very, very different people in a lot of ways, right? And so I've always been very career focused, very driven, very kind of like must get to the next rung on the ladder, for better or for worse, right? It's had positive and negative impacts on my life, I'm not going to lie. Whereas Jennifer, my sister, has always been very focused on, kind of her quality of life and after work and all of that sort of good stuff. And so from that perspective, that's not to say she hasn't had a career. She's been very thoughtful in terms of the roles that she's taken and how she's moved up the ladder and all that sort of stuff. But she's also one of these people who is very open to learning, very open to developing new skills, but is not necessarily so focused on trying to get to that next step within the next 2 years and stuff. For her, it's very much it happens when it happens, and I'm open to it happening, but I'm not going to try and drive it maybe as aggressively as I would, And I think a lot of people feel like they need to be these super driven people in interviews, and they need to show that they want to get to the next step and so on. And again, it's just that thing of making sure that you're being yourself, and you're being thoughtful, and you're being honest about how you're thinking about yourself in the context of the role and so on. There's always going to be, well, there's typically going to be a need for that role to continue into the future. Now, whether it's you doing it or not is entirely up to yourself in terms of your career ambitions and so on. But there's nothing wrong with focusing on that role specifically and just talking about yourself as the solution there, while obviously being open to other bits and pieces. But fundamentally, your approach again should be reflective of you and should be authentic to you, and not what you think the hiring manager wants to hear, because longer term, that's likely going to have some more impact for you if you're not meeting expectations, or your expectations with your hiring manager are misaligned.
100%. Yeah. So I'm just aware that it is just after quarter two, and we've got a little bit of. Let's have a quick look in the chat. If you, yeah, you want to fire on there, and we'll get back to some. If anyone has questions or comments, we'll come back to them.
Yeah, I did see a quick question about cultural fit, so I'll address that super quick. Typically speaking, if you look at the company's website, they will have something up there about their cultural tenets. So they'll probably have like 5 key words or some key phrases that describe how they, as a business, want to be perceived or want to be known for, and they try to kind of incorporate that into how they work as businesses. I would say some businesses are probably more successful at it than others. But in terms of you as a candidate, I would be somewhat enthusiastic, shall we say, about asking about the culture. I think you can definitely learn a lot about, a culture from a website, but you'll also learn more from talking to the hiring manager about how is that culture translating into their business. So it's not just about you being a cultural fit, although obviously do your research and figure out, are you a good cultural fit? Quite honestly, sometimes you have to be strict with yourself and answer that question no, right? But where you feel that the answer is yes, make sure that you're asking questions of the hiring manager or of the people in front of you to understand, is that culture translating into the business in the way that you think it is? Because sometimes it doesn't, and you need to understand that in order to make an informed decision about whether or not you want to work for that company, or you think you'll be a good fit, or it's going to be right for you. So absolutely do your research. Your company's website will help with that. I think Glassdoor is another very useful tool for folks to use, because that gives reviews from previous employees and so on. But make sure to ask questions, make sure to get yourself the comfort around the cultural fit as much as they need to get comfort around you, for sure. So going on to the next piece, if my thing. So moving back into, okay, how am I going to make this work for me? Right? You know that they're looking at your profile data, you know that they're looking at, how you interact with the platform, and you know that they're looking at, how are you kind of demonstrating what it is that you want to do, or what it is that you want to be known for. So in terms of thinking about that, there's a couple of different things that you need to be thinking of. But the main thing around intent is having a clear vision of what it is that you want to be known for. So I've taken 5 pretty famous people here and put in their vision statement from their LinkedIn profiles and their Indeed profiles, right? And you can see that they're all very different. In some cases, people are calling out their position. So founder of the Virgin Group, no prizes for guessing who that is, or chairman and CEO of Microsoft. I'm pretty sure everybody knows who those 2 people are. But some people have gone for something very short. So you can see storyteller and courage builder. That's Brené Brown. It's not necessarily immediately obvious who it is from it, but at the same time, it does give you a very clear indication of what they want to be known for. Actor, entertainer, producer, etc. That's Jennifer Lopez. I'm not sure you'd have gotten Jennifer Lopez just by reading that, but it does give you, again, a very clear vision of what it is that she wants to be known for and the priorities, right? So she starts with the actor and she finishes with owner, investor and owner. So thinking about the prioritization in there again is helpful, but having a short statement which you can use across your different social media profiles and also in your CVs and all that sort of good stuff really helps hiring managers and companies know, what is it that you want to be known for? What is your intent, and how is that going to feed into your application process? The next one, and I know you guys have probably done a session on branding, so I'm not going to drain this slide too much, but just remember that your brand is as important as your employer's, and your brand doesn't need to be something that you kind of artificially create, right? Your brand needs to be, what are you as a person known for? What are people saying about you when you're not in the room? Or what is your legacy? If you think about, if you're moving from like one job into another job, what do you want the people in the old job to remember you as doing, or remember you as being? And so having that kind of genuine brand and that feeling of authenticity about you is a really vital part of successful networking and engaging with people. What I would say is an easy way to do this, right, is taking a look at profiles and people and organizations that you admire, that you'd want to work with. Engage with that in some way and make yourself easier to find. Like I mentioned earlier, in LinkedIn and Indeed specifically, they have a filter in their backend search to say, has this person interacted with my brand? And if the answer is yes, if you try and hire somebody who has interacted with the brand, you're about, I think it's 44%, the last time I looked at it, it's about, you're 44% more likely to be with with a candidate who has interacted with your brand over one who hasn't, like a cold candidate who has never considered working for you. So if there are companies out there that you want to work for, a very simple way of making yourself visible is literally interacting with their brand on platforms where they are likely to recruit. So Indeed, LinkedIn, etc., right? When I talked about the cultural fit earlier, look at how do they talk about themselves and their employees? Are you talking about yourself in a similar sense? Or are you engaging with them on that to talk about, your perspective, your point of view? How do they refer to skills, roles, and responsibilities? So this is another thing that makes it very easy for you to help a hiring manager visualize you in a role. So if they say accounts payable, you say accounts payable. You don't say procure to pay. Or if they have another way of referring to a service, even if in an old job you would have referred to it differently, because in this company that you're applying to, they refer to it in a specific way, use that specific way because it makes it easier for them to find the information that they need. And it also helps them, again, to visualize that you're already talking their language. You're already a better fit because you are talking their language, all that sort of good stuff. But also, you have a way to reflect back to them in your CV, in the interview process, and in your interactions, their language to them to show them that you're thinking about what it would be like to work for them and how good of a fit you'll be in terms of their team, in terms of their culture, all that sort of good stuff. The last thing I would say, and I don't know if there's any older folks in the session, but when I first started working, I'm not going to tell you the date, but I will if you ask. When I first started working, email was a very new thing, right? And people were very nervous about giving kind of regular day-to-day employees access to email. So we all had to do very, very intensive email training first about what was the right thing to do with it and all that sort of good stuff. And so one of the things they said to us was, don't put anything in an email that you wouldn't be happy to see on the cover of the Irish Times. And I have taken that with me my whole life. But in terms of social media, people have gotten it's very easy to interact with social media. It's very easy to post a reaction. It's very easy to post a comment and so on. And so we've kind of lost, to a certain extent, that kind of hesitance about, okay, I just need to think about this a little bit longer before I send it. Would I be happy to see it on the cover of the Irish Times? So what I say is, before you post anything, just take a second, take a minute to think through the post. How does it represent you? Is it authentic? Does it make you feel proud? Are you comfortable that it's an accurate representation of you? If the answer to that is all yes, post and go for your life. If the answer is, ooh, maybe not, have a think. Social media isn't going anywhere. And nobody's going to die if you don't post at that particular point in time. Take a second to think about, is this the right thing for you to do? And if it is, great. And if it's not, reword it, don't post it, but just take that moment to stop and think, because all of this stuff is online. It's all discoverable and visible for the most part. And so from the point of view of prospective employers and all that sort of stuff, they will check, they will look at how you're interacting. They'll probably check your Indeed profile, your LinkedIn profile. And so from that perspective, you want what's in there to be representative of you as a person, and just making sure that everything you post represents you as a person is a step to making that happen. The next thing to do is engagement. Research. The first step, sorry, excuse me, is research. Think about, what companies do you want to work for, but obviously also what companies are going to value your experience, and target them. Because if you think they're going to value your experience and you target them, then that's making you more visible to them. And it's also making employers that you want to work for more naturally predisposed to working with you, because they can see you. You're coming up in their searches, you're coming up when their recruiters are trying to target for specific skill sets and so on. The next thing, and I know, as Europeans and potentially other folks on the call, we can be a little bit conservative, particularly when it comes to business. I know myself that it took me a long time to get over myself, for want of a better phrase, and just reach out to people that I don't know. So what I would say is, don't be afraid to interact with people that you don't know, particularly in social media, because at the end of the day, A, don't ask, don't get, but B, companies actually want to hear from you. Hiring managers and recruiters want to hear from you. And so whether it's going through content that they've posted and posting a comment comment on it, or even just interacting by saying that you like the post, that's enough to surface you. But where you see a role that you're interested in, reach out to the recruiter, reach out to the hiring manager, ask them a question or engage with them to ask about the role, and get some more information for yourself to understand, is it actually right for you? Are you reading it right? There's roles that have a lot of different names, like solution architect, for example, is one of those roles that has a load of different meanings. Like even within Accenture, there's 4 different types of solution architect, and they all have very, very different roles. But when you post it on the job, it just says solution architect. So do reach out to the hiring manager, reach out to the recruiter, and ask those questions. Get them to help you prepare for the next steps. The more that you engage with them, the more that they will promote you, if you are the right person, to the hiring manager. So I've had, recruiters who I've worked with in the past, who they've put candidates in front of me who probably I wouldn't have seen before, on the basis that the candidate interacted with them in the right way, was able to demonstrate their skill set. And so off the back of that, the recruiter has said, Karen, I really like this person for the role. I trust the recruiter because we have a good working relationship. And so I'll interview the person just on the basis of what the recruiter has told me, without even looking at their CVs. So do reach out, interact with those people, and start setting yourself up for success there. It can start by asking them a basic question, building up the conversation, getting them to support you as you move through the process. But fundamentally, having those people in your corner is a massive boost when you're going through a job search process. The last piece that I'd say here is, as I mentioned earlier, social media experiences are super easy to be both public and easy to share. So a number of you have probably seen when Rowley posted on LinkedIn that I was going to be talking at this, and immediately a load of people who were my contacts saw it and liked it, because they've either been to my talks before, for whatever reason they think I'm a good public speaker, I'm not sure why, but they interacted with that post. And so, there was a lot of love and attention around that. It got even wider around the platform as a result, and the visibility of that post increased. Your interactions work in exactly the same way. So when you like something, that promotes you on the platform. People will see that you liked it. It will surface it to your contacts to say, did you know Rowley interacted with this? Oh, that's really interesting. I wonder what he said. I'll click into it, have a look, and start thinking about it. So just to say that, yes, having a compounding effect on these positive experiences will stand to you in terms of social media profile and all that sort of good stuff, and will help to heighten you further, and again, surface you to those companies if it's company content that you're interacting with. So I'm going to pause there before I go into protect yourself. Is there any sort of questions, Rowley, or anything that you want me to
Uh,
cover off?
no, nothing's come up in terms of chat or a question, but if anyone has them, please feel free to fire it in for Karen to give a perspective on.
Super stuff.
No, but I'm loving what you're saying, and just that the challenge that who we are and how we show up, and particularly if you're getting if you're able to get a referral into a company, like for somebody to be able to stand up and say, yes, I used to work with Karen in LinkedIn, she was amazing, I'd 100% want to work with her again, like in Accenture or elsewhere. I think that's but that's such a great thing for somebody to be able to say, and it speaks volumes to a hiring manager if somebody's
It
able to,
really does. And I suppose you're kind of stealing my thunder. I shouldn't have previewed
oh
my slides
no.
to you. I shouldn't have previewed my slides. But one thing I would say is I've always been very fortunate enough to work for larger companies. So started my career in Bank of Scotland, moved into Deloitte, then went to Accenture, LinkedIn, and back to Accenture. But what I would say is, if I look at Deloitte, Accenture, LinkedIn, referrals play a huge role in how they backfill open roles. And I know from looking at the clients that I would have worked with in LinkedIn, that Amazon, for example, has 2 different types of referral. So there's a professional referral and a personal referral. I'm not sure if that's what they're called, but that's essentially what they are. And the professional referral is for me to say, yes, I've met Rowley in the professional context. I believe that he's the right person for the role because he has all of these skill sets. I think you should interview him. The personal referral, which is given heavier weight, is I know Rowley super well. I think he'll be a great cultural fit. I would love to work with him. I genuinely think he is the right person for the role. And it's not just adding your professional reputation on the line, but it's putting your personal reputation on the line. And so when people are willing to go that extra mile for you and say, this person is the person, that is going to stand to you. And in some companies, they actually will expedite folks who've gotten referrals
Wow.
on the basis that it's quicker to get somebody referred, because if I'm referring them, chances are they have the right skill set at a basic level. So I don't even, not that they won't read their CVs, but there's less requirement there.
I mean, it does, and it's really interesting that they delineate those two. I hadn't heard that before, but it's also, it makes a whole lot of sense if you or I are prepared to say, like, I like this person, I would, I'd be more than happy. Like this, like Richard Branson, who we alluded to earlier on. His test is would you sit beside them on an 8-hour flight to the States?
Yeah. And there's not many people, I'm going to be honest with you, that I do
And never
that.
mind that. Never mind that. Like, are you happy? Are you like, happy to have like a 15-minute coffee break with them most
Hmm.
days?
Yeah.
Like, it's a huge question to answer.
Yeah. And it's not to say that we all, and one of the things I get concerned with, like, Accenture was very different to LinkedIn. LinkedIn was very
Mm.
different to Deloitte and so on. And that's not to say, like, I've been a good cultural fit in all of those organizations. So that's not to say that I've had to change myself to fit into an organization, but it's more, like I mentioned earlier, people being able to visualize me in the context of that organization as I currently present myself. And quite honestly, if they can't, do I really want to work there? You know what I mean? Do I really want to work somewhere where I'm not going to necessarily be additive to the team, or they feel like I'm going to have challenges in terms of being able to do my job for whatever reason? And the answer to that is probably no. You want to work somewhere where you feel like you are a good fit across all the different facets, not just cultural, but across all the different facets. And so sometimes it can be disappointing to hear, you didn't get the job, or we don't think you're the right person for this job. But fundamentally, you kind of have to look at the flip side of that as well, which is to say, okay, fair enough. But the other side of that is maybe if they'd given me the job, I wouldn't have been, or I wouldn't have been as successful as I would have wanted to have been.
Hmm. Yeah. So actually, there's a question from Deepa. If we're happy to jump to that.
Yeah, of course,
It'd be
absolutely.
great to hear from Accenture. What does Accenture hire for? What are innate qualities that they would like from their candidates? And
Oh
that's
gosh,
obviously that's a
that's a
very kind
very
of
big question.
general, but it's general, but it's also big. So yeah.
So I would say Accenture currently employs, I want to say, about 650,000 people. So I would say that there's no specific
Mm.
skill set that we would particularly look at. We look for lots of different skill sets. So chances are, if you take a look, you'll probably find a job that you'd be interested in. I think the big thing from an Accenture perspective is probably a couple of things. One is collaboration, the ability, because we're typically solving problems for clients at a very basic level, and admittedly that's a bit simplistic, but typically we're solving a problem for a client. When you're problem solving, you can't tell somebody the answer, right? Because you typically wouldn't know the answer. So there is a lot of collaboration that goes on in Accenture in order to be able to A, arrive at the conclusion as to what the solution to the problem is, but B, then how to actually incorporate that solution into the company's future. Sometimes it's something that we have to do over the space of like 10 years. It may not be a quick solution, and in some cases it is a quick solution, and then it's just a case of figuring out who the right people are to make that happen. But fundamentally, collaboration is a big thing. The ability to be client facing is also something that we would look for in terms of, have you got good relationship management skills? Have you got the kind of approach to relationship management that gets the best out of the relationship, not just for the customer or the client, obviously, but for ourselves as well? And understanding, how do you manage those relationships and get the best out of them, even when there's like an escalation situation or you have to have a difficult conversation. That's something else that we'd look for. But there's a lot of kind of soft skills that Accenture typically looks for, and then the harder skills, gosh, there's all sorts of jobs in Accenture, so it just depends on what you're interested in, really. And then, depending on the role, people management may come into it, for example, and how do you manage people's performance, that sort of stuff. But yeah, fundamentally, a lot of it comes down to relationships and collaboration.
That makes a lot of sense, considering the relationships that you have across multiple industries,
Yeah,
and how you work in the services you provide to your customers. So that
yeah.
does make an awful lot of sense, and that they'd be really high up there. What are you going to share with us about Brené's quote?
So it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Worthiness doesn't have prerequisites. And the reason that I bring that up is because I feel, when, as a hiring manager and as somebody who's had to support companies in figuring out what skill sets they're looking for, one of the things that I've noticed about candidates is typically speaking, people feel, for whatever reason, a need to justify their presence, and a need to justify why they're in front of the hiring manager. And that to me is, it can impact on the hiring process and the interview process, me really getting to know the person. But the other side of it is, it kind of, to me, almost has the wrong lens on why you're going through this process, right? I'm never going to apply for a job as a brain surgeon, right? And the reason I'm not is because I'm in no way qualified to do that job. I'm only ever going to really apply for jobs that I am qualified to do, or at least partially qualified to do. And so on that basis, I shouldn't feel the need to justify my presence if I get to the point where I'm in front of a hiring manager. And so I want, as part of this section, to kind of address that and say, start thinking in this other way, to try and help people kind of remove the nervousness, because with that justification comes nervousness, and remove a level of anxiety from the process and focus people a little bit more on kind of answering what is the real question, which is, how can I be the solution to this person's problem? So the big thing, these are the 4 components. I'm going to go through them, hopefully, assuming we have time, to one by one. But the first one, as I mentioned, is around mindset. And this is kind of going simply from why me to why not me. And the second you start thinking, why not me? That's where you start thinking about yourself as a solution to somebody's problem, right? If you're looking at a job spec, right, start thinking about, that all of these tasks need to be done, right? And I don't need to know from you, can you do them? I need to know, have you done them before, and have you done them well? If you've done them well, what has been the outcome of you doing that well? Did you, save your company money? Did you go through, a massive volume of invoices? Did you, how has what your performance in this role, kind of impacted that company and impacted their ability to be more agile, more successful, or whatever it is, right? So I would say, stop thinking about the tasks and start thinking about the outcomes from those tasks. The reason that people have them in job specs is to help you understand the components of the role. What you need to be talking about when you're talking about in your CV and your application is how successful you have been in that role. And again, helping the hiring manager to visualize the value that you're going to bring to the table, help them to visualize the solution that you represent in terms of the gap that they are trying to fill. And then thinking about it from an authenticity perspective. What connects you to this job, right? Why are you applying for it? We've all been in situations before where we just need a job. We need to pay the rent, we need to pay our bills, whatever it is, and we just need a job. And that's fine. And it's okay to have a conversation in that context, absolutely. But where you're looking at a job that somehow fits into your career path, or you believe is going to help you start on a career path, start thinking about, what is your personal connection to that? And then how do you then translate that into the conversation that you're having with the hiring manager, into your personal statement, all that sort of good stuff, so that you're really connecting the dots, for yourself as much as anything, but also for hiring managers, to help them understand what's driving you, what gets you out of bed in the morning, other than a very strong cup of coffee in my case, that type of thing. And really just presenting yourself as a well-rounded candidate, not somebody who completes tasks, because that's bum in a seat mode, right? And we don't want a bum in a seat. We want the right person in the right job.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, absolutely.
So then this is the piece, and this is why I accused Rowley of stealing my thunder. One of the things that I did want to talk to folks about is thinking about, where do you see the most bang for your buck, right? And where you're going to see that are the parts of the recruitment process that you can influence, right? And so what you'll see there, in the numbers, right, is if you look at referred, for every 10 referred candidates, 1 candidate is hired, right? Which sounds kind of high. But then if you look at direct sourcing, and what direct sourcing is when a recruiter reaches out to you and says, hey, Rowley, I think, this is a good job. I'm looking at your skills. It looks like you'd be a good fit for this job. Would you be interested in talking to me? That's direct sourcing. The hiring ratio from that is typically, for every 20 candidates that we reach out to, 1 person is hired. And then if you think about throwing in your application, right? And you might sweat blood, sweat, and tears over your CV and put it in through a general application. If it's a good quality job posting where you've been able to clearly say, my skills are a match, or 80% of my skills or whatever is a match, that's 150 candidates that have to be reviewed before 1 person gets hired. And if it's a bad quality job posting, that goes up to 200. So you need to think about ways for you to be able to reduce the noise for yourself. And you also need to be thinking about how do you make yourself easy to find for recruiters. Recruiters typically don't have one job spec that they focus on. They usually have a rake of them. Like most of the TA folks I've worked with have been managing between 20 and 30. And if you're thinking that they're trying to find 20 or 30 candidates at any given time and they're under pressure to backfill them yesterday, then they're going to spend their time where they know that they're going to see the most quality candidate applications. And typically speaking, that is going to be in referrals, and that is going to be reaching out directly to candidates who you think are a good fit. And so you guys need to be thinking about how do you get your referrals, how do you surface yourself higher in those searches, so that fundamentally those recruiters are focused on you or are going to identify you as part of the target candidate pool, that they're going to then put in front of the hiring manager. And all the efforts that you're putting in at the moment, and I know you've probably had other sessions on this in terms of networking, establishing your identity and your profiles on the various platforms, and engaging with content, all of this helps you to be more visible. Engaging with recruiters, you may not get the first job that you engage with them on, but they may keep you in mind for something else. Again, when I was a hiring manager, I've absolutely done that, where either I met somebody and I thought, God, they're not right for this job, but the next one that comes up, they might be right for. And there's a couple of folks on my team who I did hire the second go round because they were the right fit for the new job that I was hiring for. So thinking about how you can surface yourself is really, really critical. And I'm going to pause for a sec to take a drink of water. Sorry.
You do that. And then I can ask you this question from Michelle, which loops straight into it. And she said they're very interesting stats and they tie into what we talk about on JobNet a bit. And are these, I was just wondering, are these ratios for Accenture, Ireland, or worldwide?
Oh, excuse me. So these are worldwide.
Okay,
They're not
great.
Accenture specific.
Hmm.
Oh, sorry, my voice has gone a bit. But what I would say is, when I looked at some of the higher performing clients that I would have had in LinkedIn,
Yeah.
and Accenture was one of them, we would see that roughly between 60 and 70, and it very much depended on the skill set, right? But roughly between 60 and 70% of the successful candidates were coming from referred or direct sourcing.
Yeah.
So you're talking about 30% of candidates were coming from applications.
Yeah, no, that does make a lot of sense, and it makes a lot of sense why companies put so many energy into asking their people to say, who do you know in this role, or hey, can we pay you a bonus to get somebody in, because it's going to save us time in recruitment.
Mm-hmm,
We're more likely to, like you said, it was like people are way more likely, it's way more successful an outcome.
mm-hmm,
And also, like, if you're showing up on someone's referral, like, you're gonna like get on with the job, and go, it's not just me, that's my
mm.
friend's reputation's on the line too, right?
Exactly. And I've been referred twice actually. And in both times, I was definitely conscious of the responsibility that came with being a referral on that basis, And I suppose the other thing is just to think about, and you, again, this is probably not something that candidates think about, but if I'm going through a recruitment process, typically speaking, and assuming that it's like a role that's not super niche, right? It might be a fairly generalized role. Typically speaking, it's going to take a month to find my slate of candidates, right? So that's a
Mm-hmm.
recruiter trying to find for a month a slate of candidates, and then we will have a month of them doing, interviews with members of my team and so on before they get to me, right? And so it might be 2.5 months before we've gone through the end-to-end process and I've identified a candidate, and then we go into negotiations and blah blah blah. That person will typically have between 1 and 3 months notice. So
Mm-hmm.
it's between kind of 4 and 6 months before I get somebody in the door.
Yeah. I'm also aware it's 12:15, and I promised to free you up around then. Are you happy to answer one more question, and we'll leave it there, or do you want
Yeah,
to
of
wrap
course,
up?
absolutely. Yeah.
Great. So Breda asked the question. It was like, as a pivoter with extensive background in ops and the technical area, and you want to move into kind of coaching, lecturing, in the same field, what's the best approach to find connections or trails to follow up? Any suggestions there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing that I would probably start off with is, typically speaking, there are community groups on forums like Indeed, like LinkedIn, where you can meet with similar like-minded people who are also either in that area already or are seeking to get into that area. That would be the first element that I would look at. The next is probably looking at in my country or in my city or my town, are there community groups again that I can get engaged with there in terms of, finding again like-minded people that you can be having those discussions with. If you're talking about growing a business, which is slightly different, I would be thinking about what would my go-to-market strategy be, right? There's a lot of online free tools that you can use to start building your brand, and engaging with content and creating your own content for people to engage with. And so I'd start thinking about, like LinkedIn, and I worked for LinkedIn, but there's definitely like similar for. I'm just going to talk about that because it's a bit easier. But if you go into LinkedIn, you can get a free company page. Within that, you have a blog that you can post to that gives you all sorts of metrics and all that sort of stuff, and it will also enable you to connect with groups and so on. So you'd have to think about this almost as if you're a company trying to find people. How do I surface myself? And how do I surface what it is that I want to do? And again, typically that's going to be through publishing content, getting people to engage with your content, and figuring out then what else is going to push you in front of the people that you're interested in. You can do targeted paid marketing, but I'd say to start off with, you're probably better off just looking at what content can you produce and how do you push it out there to your existing network, who will then push it to their network. So if you think about, I have 100 first degree connections, I don't know how many you have, but say you have 100, you push it out to them, 50 of them like it and they share it, that means it goes to their first connections, and so on and so forth. So if you think about that ripple effect and that positive kind of reinforcement that I mentioned earlier, those would be the areas that I would look at over and above kind of connecting with either professional communities or like-minded people style communities, for you to kind of push your brand out there as well.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that's great. Um, and also just like use your own connections. Like we
Hmm.
say all the time at Jobcare is there's every chance that the next job you're going to find is through someone who's already in your phone, and it'll be very very much the same for any connections around kind of building your own kind of independent business or service. If that.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree. I know I said don't ask, don't get earlier. In both of the
Mm,
cases where I was referred, it's because I found a job and I knew somebody who worked there. In one case, I didn't even know them that well and said,
yeah.
I want to work for Accenture. This is my first go around in Accenture. I want to work for Accenture. I know you. Would you be willing to refer me? And we met, we had a coffee, and he kind of did a preliminary job interview with me to
Good.
kind of make sure that he was comfortable to refer me. But
That's
he
good.
did. He got 5 grand,
Yeah.
right?
It's,
And I got a job. So
it's
from that
worth time having a
perspective,
cup of coffee, right?
and I paid for the coffee, right? So it wasn't even that. So that's why I'd
Yeah.
say to you, don't be afraid to reach out to people who you may not know very well, if you know
Yeah,
them
no,
even tangentially.
I had a friend who referred me into Riot Games as well, and he referred in 3 to 4 good candidates a year. He brought his family on holiday. He's paid for his family holidays every year from his referral fund.
Hmm.
It was great.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
I'm just really aware that we're at the end of time here, and it's just wondering, are there any last things you wanted to say to wrap up, or do we need to get you out the door?
So the only thing that I would say, these slides are going to go out, and as you probably guessed, I didn't talk fast enough. There's some other bits and pieces in there for you, to take a look at, around negotiation strategy, putting together your plan on a page, and all that stuff. So do have a look through all of that. But what I would say is, please do, if you want to connect, please do just give me a shout. I'm always happy to connect on LinkedIn, or I'm always happy to connect. As I said, Rowley has my contact details,
Mhm.
and I'm always happy to follow up with you folks in terms of if it's giving interview coaching or if it's doing some prep with you, all of that sort of good stuff. Just reach out, and take that risk. I know I talk very fast and I'm a bit intense at times, but fundamentally, my commitment to you guys and to Jobcare is that if anybody reaches out, I'll always at least have a virtual coffee
Amazing.
with you for sure.
That's great. And Brita, Sandra, Carmel, Sunita, Deepa all say thanks. It was a great session. If you, Karen, feel free to bounce. But if you guys have a second, I just wanted to share. I imagine some of you will have seen. So just in terms of who we are at Jobcare, if you come to us and you just followed a link from LinkedIn, or if you've been part of our sessions before, we're a charity that equips people with skills, knowledge, and confidence to overcome the barriers, and secure appropriate work. And that's all we do. Like we don't like sell things on the side. We don't have another kind of business model, and kind of ways in which we can support you, or through our courses. We We run a community employment scheme, so if you're over a year unemployed, you can apply to come in and work with us, and that's a 19.5 hour week position. And we've got everything from people working in our catering team, Gen Ops, people working in HR, payroll, IT training, and on the team that I work with, in the job club, running courses and running sessions to get people back to work. We also have the two courses that I mentioned. There's a job seekers course, which is a real kind of nuts and kind of bolts, kind of how to build a CV, how to prepare for an interview, and that's a 4-week course, and it's kind of really in depth, helping you to kind of get that process rolling. And then we have a JobNet program, which is really for kind of a self-starter, somebody who's a graduate or kind of mid-career, just to be able to help them to understand like really how to network and drill into an awful lot of the things that Karen was discussing today. We can also offer one-to-one support. That might be a call with one of our people. It could just be helping people prep for a CV, or even prep a CV. There's lots of ways we can help. We also have coaches that can walk you through some questions you might have. And then we can have a follow-up program called Kickstart, and that helps us to get people through and out to work. And if you particularly helpful for people who are in niche areas where roles might come up infrequently, and it's much more in depth. This is really where you've got to work, you've got to show up, there's accountability, you've got to say what you're doing this week, what you're working on, and you've got to report back on it the following week to kind of share what that is. If there's anything we can do to help you with that, you can find us at jobcare.ie. All our details in there, and you can apply for any of our courses. Amazing. Karen, thank you so much for your time this morning. It's been a real pleasure talking to you, a real treat, and I hope everyone who's on the call has found that useful too.
Well, fingers crossed, and if they haven't, give me a shout and I'll see what I can do.
Amazing. Great. Super. That's great. Karen, thanks for your time. We'll see you again.
See you
Take
soon.
care.
Thanks.
We'll catch you all again soon. Bye now.
Bye.